My name is Keith McArthur, and I'm the father of a teenager with high special needs. He's got physical and cognitive disabilities, and his name is Bryson.
Can you talk about your podcast, Unlocking Bryson's Brain?
Sure, yeah. So about 2 years ago, I learned from scientists that they thought that the part of the brain that Bryson's rare disease targets, the GRIN1 receptor or the GRIN1 gene and the NMDA receptor, was a part of the brain that was responsive to therapies, could potentially be responsive to gene therapies. And there was also research that showed that this one researcher built a mouse with an on-off switch where she realized that you could kind of use CRISPR, use gene editing to create a mouse with a variant in the GRIN1 gene, so a similar mutation to what our kids have. And then when the mouse grew up to become an adult, she could turn off this on-off switch. And then when she did that, not only did the mouse's genes go back to normal, but its phenotype, all of its symptoms went not completely back to wild type, but it seemed to be more like a typical mouse. And so these messages just gave me so much hope that I decided that, I wanted to kind of devote my life to looking into these cures and therapies that could help Bryson and other people like him to be able to communicate better, express his wants and needs. And at the same time, because of my background as a journalist, I brought my recorder with me as I started having these meetings with researchers, and just thought that it could make a great podcast. And so I went to the CBC and they agreed. And so Unlocking Bryson's Brain is an 8-part podcast series about Bryson and his rare disease and our family's search for a cure.
Can you tell me about Bryson? What is his personality like?
Yeah, Bryson is, really happy and social most of the time. He really likes being around people. He likes being around his brother Connor and Laura and I and his caregiver Edna. He also has these episodes that we've kind of always wondered if they're a kind of seizure or if there's something different. They'll kind of come up out of nowhere, and he's really upset and seems like he's angry and starts hurting himself and others. So so most of the time he's so happy, but he also has these moments that seem really hard for him and, also become hard for anyone around him.
Switching gears here a little bit, how has Bryson been adapting to life under lockdown?
So he's probably done better than we thought. We were quite nervous about it at first because Bryson loves school. He loves seeing his friends. When we get him in his wheelchair in the morning, sometimes he's at the door, looking at the door. I'm in the kitchen finishing his lunch. And as soon as the school bus arrives, I can tell before I see it, because I could just hear him getting excited there. So he loves school. And then sometimes in the past on weekends, when he was at home, he seemed to really get upset. He'd be like, "Hey, I got to go to school. I don't know what you guys are doing, but it's, that's where I belong." And so he would sometimes have hard days. So I would say overall, he's done better than we thought. There's been a few days that have been really tough for him, where he's had these, what we call seizure-like episodes, because we still don't know what they are, where he's being really violent. And, there's been a couple of days where his legs have just been covered in bruises because he's just flailing around and we can't calm him or keep him still. But for the most part, he's done better than we had hoped.
Yeah, you mentioned you mentioned that in the podcast, how he really loves going to school. Could you talk about the relationship that he has with his friends and his teachers there?
Yeah, I would say this last year has been especially great because he had this teacher who, in the past, I think one of the challenges is that in these schools with kids with high special needs and disabilities, often, the kids spend most of their time in their chairs. And he had this teacher last year who had set up mats and just got all the kids out of their chairs, and they were in the mats and kind of rolling around together and even almost wrestling a bit. And I think that kind of physical contact that sometimes children living with physical disabilities don't get it is really important. And so, this year he had this really special bond, especially with this one other kid named Jared. And I think they're both going to the same school next year. So, and they should be in the same class next year. So it's great that kind of friendship will be able to continue. There's this other little girl who's a couple years younger than her. And we joke that they're boyfriend and girlfriend because, she's able to walk. And she always wants to go visit Bryson. And so she'll kind of go right up to him. She's in a different class, but she'll want to go visit him in his class and just goes up and gives him kisses, and Bryson just lights up. So yeah, he has some really good relationships with the kids at the school.
And he really does have the brightest smile from from the photos I've seen of him.
Yeah, he does. He's got a great smile, that's for sure.
Have you had to move Bryson's classes online?
Yeah. So one of the challenges is that, for Bryson, school is more than just learning, right? It's about, that's where he's gotten most of his, recently, that's where he's gotten most of his physiotherapy, and that's where he's gotten his speech therapy. And so, those are things that when we are at home and in quarantine, he really doesn't have access to anymore. So that's been one of the big challenges. His teacher has recorded, his teacher plays guitar, so he's recorded a bunch of songs and recorded a bunch of videos of him reading books. So that's fantastic, and we share those with Bryson. And once a week, they do a session where whatever kids are able to log in through Zoom, and they do like a Zoom classroom. So it's not a full classroom experience, but he's getting a little bit of that.
So you mentioned how his physiotherapy and his speech therapy as well, how that has been impacted by COVID. Have you and Laura had to pick up some of those responsibilities and had to adapt in any way?
Well, I mean, it's the kind of thing that it can't only happen at school. Like, definitely there's stuff that we have to do at home to help him to develop that as well. And because we're both working at home and spending more time, that is the other side of it. The benefit is that we do have more time where we're able to spend that with him. So we're able to get him into his walker more at home, for example. And the school, he has this modified bike that he uses at the school, or modified tricycle, I guess, that he really likes. So the school is, it's taken a while to arrange it, but the school is going to send that to us so that he can, use the bike in the schoolyard across the street. So there's things like that. We're also going to ask the school if there's like modified speech tools that he can use. So for example, at school, he sometimes has used eye gaze technology to try to learn how to communicate, with kind of mixed success, I would say. But that's the kind of thing that, if nobody else is using right now or using over the summer, we want to find out from the school if that's something that we might be able to use with him at home.
Right. How would, I'm completely ignorant of how that sort of thing works. How would communication work? Like, would it be with eye movements?
Exactly. Yeah. So there are people who, can communicate with this really well, but it's basically, there'll be a computer screen with a little camera on top and, different words on the screen. And by looking at the different words, they can speak in sentences or express their wants and needs. Bryson's at the point where he hasn't really shown enough interest in doing that yet. So we're still trying to encourage it and keep them at it. But for now, what he does with it is to try and kind of teach the eye gaze technology is things like games. So, we sent the school a picture of our dog Quincy, and Bryson there's a picture of a cream pie, and Bryson can, with his eye, make the cream pie go over and hit Quincy in the face, like those kinds of games.
Now, for access to medical services as well, has he been attending any of his appointments via telehealth now?
He hasn't. The only thing that he had scheduled was so because he has these episodes that I talk about that may or may not be seizures, his neurologist wanted to bring him in for a few nights and have him wear this EEG hat that basically they put wires all over his head to try to determine if there's seizure activity going on in the brain. He's done this before where he's been in the hospital for a few nights and they weren't able to detect these episodes. but we were planning to bring him in for another one. So obviously that is on hold. He does have a doctor's appointment. I think it's next week with the neurologist. So that we'll do by telephone. And then otherwise, one of the real challenges with Bryson is that he doesn't like his teeth being brushed. We just, as much as we try, we can't brush his teeth. So usually we have to bring him into the dentist every 2 months for a cleaning, which is a really traumatic experience for him and for us, and probably for the dentist too. So that's another thing that, unfortunately has been on hold. So we're a little bit worried about that and what that's going to do to his mouth and teeth.
Bryson requires full-time care to meet his daily needs. On weekends, Keith and Laura are his primary caregivers. During the week, that role is filled by Edna.
And so usually she comes over and looks after him every day after school. And right now she's modified her hours so that she can be here, almost for a full day for us. And she quarantines at her house and we quarantine here. And so we go and drive a couple hours every day to pick her up and bring her here so she doesn't have to get exposed potentially on the bus or the taxi. So we have that. In addition, just generally, the province of Ontario provides for Bryson 9 hours a week of care. And usually we get that every morning where someone comes into our house and helps him get ready for school, gives him his breakfast, gets him dressed, helps him on the toilet and that kind of thing. But that's something where early on we just said we don't want to take the risk of having people come into the house, and so we've canceled that. So that's something that isn't happening right now. We're trying to be extra careful with self-isolation or social distancing because with with GRIN disorder, Bryson's condition, it's something where it's not typically degenerative or fatal, but there have been a handful of children who have died from GRIN disorder, and respiratory issues seem to be one of the main causes because these kids have low muscle tone. If something gets in their lungs, they can't always get it out, for example. And so, we assume that he would be at higher risk of COVID because of that. And because I've had a kidney transplant and I'm on immunosuppressants to lower my immunity so I don't reject the kidney, I'm also presumably at higher risk for COVID. So just because of both Bryson and I, we've really tried to kind of completely self-isolate.
So you mentioned about Edna, and that was something that you talked about in your podcast as well, that they've got a special relationship, Edna and Bryson. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, so Edna grew up in a very large family. I can't remember. I think maybe like 10 or 12 kids. I mentioned in the podcast. I just can't remember the number. But her youngest sister was born with a disability and died when she was very young. And so I think because of that, Edna's always had a special affinity for people with disabilities and special needs. And so so because of that, she was just, the perfect fit when we were going to hire someone when my wife, Laura, was going back to work. And, she's just been with us for so long that she really is almost like another parent to Bryson. And she sometimes understands what he wants or needs better than us. She's sometimes able to, when he starts to get upset, she's sometimes able to calm him down better than we can. And so, yeah, it's just great to have her around and for him to have that relationship with her.
You mentioned about her being able to tune into his needs. And I'm curious as well for both you and Laura, how do you decipher what his needs are or what exactly he's asking for at a particular moment?
So sometimes it's more obvious, like he does it in ways that other people sometimes could understand as well. So if we're not sure what he wants for a snack, if we hold out a pudding and an applesauce, he'll reach out for one or the other. So that kind of choice making is sort of more obvious. But there's also all these nonverbal cues that Laura and I can pick up on that other people, won't really understand. So he does this very subtle, sometimes noise with his mouth. And I just know that he wants a drink when he does that. But I don't think at school or anything, they'd be able to pick up on it because they just haven't, the teachers there haven't spent as much time with him. Yeah, so it's kind of a combination of some more obvious things and some more simple things. But the truth is that so much of the time we don't know. If he starts to get upset, we don't know what it's about. And um, you know, really, if there was just a way that we could help him to communicate better, whether it's through words or signs or some other kind of assisted communication, that would really be, we really wish that there was that, so that we could understand his needs better and help to meet them.
Keith is determined to make life easier for Bryson and others living with GRIN disorders through his work at CureGRIN.
As part of that same meeting that I talked about, where we heard from researchers that a cure would be possible, I started doing my own meetings with researchers, but then I also got together with a group of other parents, and we were kind of talking about what we could do together. And so there's someone named Denise in Colorado. She started up a global foundation based in the US, and she asked me to co-lead it with her. So the two of us co-lead this organization, and essentially, we're doing a few things. Part of it is trying to raise money to drive research around cures and therapies for GRIN disorders. Part of it is providing support and education for all the different GRIN families. So, when new families get diagnosed, often they can't learn very much from their own doctors because there's just not that much known yet. So, they'll come to us, or they'll come to other parents through our online communities, seeking information and assistance. And that's great to be able to provide that sense of community to these new families as they're diagnosed. And so far things have been going really well. So we've raised a bunch of money from families and friends. But we've also, we're lucky enough to get a grant from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. So Mark Zuckerberg, who's the founder of Facebook, and his wife, Priscilla Chan, who's a pediatrician, started the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is a foundation they're addressing a bunch of things from education to science and medicine. And one of their stated goals is to try to basically find cures for all known diseases by the end of this century. And so one of the ways that they're doing that is to really try to strengthen and build up parent associations. And so we went through a lengthy application process, and we're fortunate enough to be selected as one of their the first organizations that they're working with. So it comes with a grant to help bolster our organization and help us build a community of researchers around the world. But it also comes with a lot of other kinds of support and training that has been really great. So, we've only been around for a year, our organization, but we're really happy with how far we've come and the progress we've made so far.
Yeah, congratulations on winning that grant as well.
Thank you.
That's huge.
Yeah, it was really good.
With lockdowns in place now, how has that been impacting you as an organization?
Mm-hmm. It's been tricky. So certainly, any lab work that doesn't involve COVID is on hold. For the most part, labs are slowly starting to open up in some places, but for the most part, all of the work that our researchers have been doing has been on hold. The other thing that is sometimes was a challenge early on is that, so much of the research involves animal models and usually mice. And so there were a number of researchers who have developed mice with GRIN disorder variants to study and to try new therapies. And at least one of the researchers had to, just because they couldn't, I guess that the university couldn't justify sending in all the veterinary staff and everyone else that had to look after the animals, had to terminate a number of the animal models. So that was sad. That sets the research back a bit. It's also obviously sad for the animals. So we're really, trying to work with the researchers on priorities for when things open up again. So there's a lot that we're still trying to have conversations with researchers and with biotech and to develop things to go next. So for example, there's some researchers that we've worked with who, one researcher who has this novel, Dr. David Liu, I talk about him in the podcast series, has this novel kind of gene editing. And another company in Boston that we talked to, where they have this unique way of delivering therapies to the brain. And so we're trying to combine those two devices and hopefully get one of the labs that has GRIN mice to trial these therapies on the mice when things reopen again, hopefully later this summer or in the fall.
So I know with Bryson's disorder, something you talk about in the podcast is that if there were to be a cure available, like say today, for example, it wouldn't necessarily be able to fully reverse all the effects of Bryson's disorder due to the fact that his brain has developed until this age. So is that something that you worry about now that the pandemic is going on and we don't really know when all these different lockdown measures are going to be lifted? Like, is that a worry of yours when essentially having that lost time due to the delay in research?
I would say not as much for me as for, like, I'm plugged into a bigger kind of rare disease community. And certainly there are a number of other conditions that are degenerative and where, kids' lives often they don't live until adulthood, or these diseases that will kill people. I think, the loss of maybe 6 months of research is going to have a much bigger and devastating impact for those diseases. And if for Bryson, because of the fact that it's generally not a degenerative disease, I think we can be more patient and we can wait without worrying quite so much about that.
How has the rest of your family outside of Bryson been coping under lockdown?
I think we've been doing okay. So for Connor, he for the first couple of weeks after school closed down, a lot of his friends were still getting together in person. But he understood that because of Bryson and me, we had to be extra careful, and he's been really great about it, and just being part of the team in terms of helping us to keep isolating in our home. Laura, right from the start, was able to work from home. She actually works at University Health Network, which is a number of the biggest hospitals in Toronto. She's involved in their patient engagement team and patient relations and that kind of thing. And so she's been really busy kind of working on what the patient response to COVID should be. So, especially early on, she was working really long hours, but at least she was able to do it from home. And so, I think we're doing okay, probably the same as anyone, that there's days that are really hard and then other days that are really easy. We're also lucky that we live in a pretty quiet neighborhood in North Toronto where, it's easy for us to go out for walks and maintain 6 feet separation, especially if we're walking with Bryson. People are usually willing to then be the ones that cross the street. And so, so that's lucky we're able to get out of the house still and enjoy the outdoors.
Do you think that privilege has played a role in your family's experience of the pandemic?
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, the fact that, we're both in jobs where we are able to work from home, obviously the people who are out working tend to be people who are, people in lower paid jobs, often in hourly jobs, that are working in stores or, the grocery store, or delivering parcels for Amazon, or, working in the warehouses, like people who tend to have lower income, lower education, and also tend to be more people that are visible minorities. So yeah, there's definitely, something about that. The fact that we are, living in our own home, not in an apartment. We've got space. We can, as I mentioned, we can walk outside easily without having to get on an elevator where we might, be in risk of getting in contact with other people, that we can walk outside with space. All of that, there's definitely some privilege involved in.
Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you'd like to talk about?
No, I don't think so. This has been really great. Thank you for doing this.
I'm in quarantine from COVID-19, at home staying clean, waiting on a vaccine, self-isolation, physical distance. If you don't, you threaten our existence. Here's a list of those at high risk, dying by the virus. All we got: heart disease, lung disease, hypertension, diabetes, give me your attention. Cerebral palsy, cancer, follow me, follow There's only one answer. Lay low, time to preserve. Stay home, flatten the curve. If you're asymptomatic, that's still problematic. Incubation, that's 14 days, son. Stay in your place, unless it's essential. 6 feet of space, where death is the potential. Whatever the weather, we're in this together. Lay low, yo, and stay the home.